Oh my God, if I die, I'm a legend. When they lay me down to rest, I know I was always repping. Oh my God, my whole life.
So today we're comparing the brand new Pixel 2 XL with the OnePlus 5, which on the face of it might seem like a bit of an odd comparison to make, but as we head through it, it'll start to make more sense. So to kick things off, we're going to very quickly summarize some of the main pros and cons of buying each smartphone. The first thing to notice about both of these smartphones is that neither supports wireless charging and neither has an SD card slot. Now these are both kind of disappointing, and the SD card slot is normally removed in order to encourage people to buy the higher storage option, which are normally quite a bit more expensive than the base models. One thing they both have in common is fantastic fingerprint scanners that are not only well positioned, unlike perhaps the S8 or the Note 8, but also they're very fast to unlock. You can feel for them and your fingers will naturally fall in place on top of them. It also has dual front-facing stereo speakers, which frankly speaking, both in terms of volume and fullness, put the OnePlus 5's little one in the corner to complete shame. It's IP67 water resistant, which is not great considering it's late 2017 and most phones have IP68, but taking a look at the OnePlus 5, that has no certification whatsoever. Now some people who've actually tried using the OnePlus 5 have dunked it in water for some strange reason, but somehow the phone has survived it. So unofficially, the phone is somewhat water resistant, but I wouldn't recommend trying it. Also, the benefit of buying a product directly from Google is that you get the latest version of stock Android. For example, the Pixel 2 out of the box is going to have Android 8.0, whereas for the OnePlus 5, the company hasn't even made an announcement as to when this update is coming. In favour of the OnePlus, we've got a headphone jack, which for some people is going to make no difference whatsoever, and for other people is going to be the reason you side with this smartphone. But also, we have the OnePlus 5's saving grace, the OnePlus 5's strongest selling point, and the main reason we are making this comparison, its price. If you search around, you can find the OnePlus 5 retailing for about $480 US. Now compare that to the same capacity Pixel model, and that's going to cost you $850. So let's talk about screens, and this is really where it starts to get quite interesting. The OnePlus 5 has a 5.5-inch 1080p AMOLED display, and it's really bright, really vibrant. In contrast, we've got the Pixel 2 XL with a 6-inch 2880 by 1440 display. Now this is a higher resolution display, which is also, even though it's a larger screen, a fair bit higher in terms of pixel density. So yes, it is a sharper display, but can you really tell? And I'm going to say for the average consumer, the answer is no. Now when you look at these two phones side by side, you'll notice they've got a completely different form factor. Whilst the Google Pixel is adopting something they call a full screen display, in a similar vein to what we've seen on the Note 8 or the S8, or even the LG V30, the OnePlus 5 plays it a bit safe. In terms of its design, especially from the front of the phone, it almost looks like a phone from yesteryear. It fits in probably better with flagship phones from 2016 than it does with ones from this year. So in that sense, we've got to give some credit to the Google phone. However, whilst Google markets this as a full screen smartphone, you'll notice its screen to body ratio is only just over 76%. Compare that to the OnePlus 5's 73%, and actually you realise there's barely any difference at all. The fact of the matter is the Pixel 2 XL, whilst it has a longer display, the rather apparent bezels around the top, bottom, and either side start to somewhat counteract that. To put some context into this screen-to-body ratio business, the Xiaomi Mi Mix, released in 2016, has an 83.6% ratio. And fair enough, that was a game-changing design, and to be honest inspired a generation of smartphones after it. But even the Galaxy Note 8, believe it or not, has an 83.2% ratio, which when you compare that to the 76.4% we've seen on the Pixel 2 XL, is really a world apart. The Pixel 2 smartphones use P-OLED display technology, and in terms of what that translates to, essentially you get a very similar level of brightness to the OnePlus 5's AMOLED, but slightly, and I mean very slightly, less rich colours. In terms of performance, this story starts to get even more convoluted, because whilst the Pixel 2 XL has a very solid spec sheet, it's got a 2.35 GHz Snapdragon 835 and 4 GB of RAM. That's still top tier. The OnePlus 5 pretty much blitzes it. Not only does it have either 6 or 8 GB of RAM by default, but actually the processor inside is overclocked. The Snapdragon 835 in the OnePlus 5 actually comes at 2.45 GHz, which, yes, is a subtle difference, but is enough for it in terms of benchmarks and other applications to slightly pull ahead. Now notice also that because the OnePlus 5 has less pixels to push on its display, everything automatically is just going to perform better. However, in terms of UI responsiveness, in terms of fluidity, both phones seem completely on par, aka these are probably two of the fastest phones to use right now, and that's great news. The battery capacities of the two phones are really rather similar. The OnePlus 5 has 3300 mAh, whereas the Pixel has 3520. But bear in mind the OnePlus 5 has a smaller display as well as less pixels to push, but more or less they're going to be very much on par, and you wouldn't buy one phone over the other just because of its battery. So just before we get onto a camera comparison, we are trying incredibly hard to hit 700,000 subscribers by the end of this month, so if you could support me by subscribing, I would really appreciate it. The cameras on the two phones see quite a significant divergence, whereas we know the Pixel 2 XL has a 12 megapixel single camera. The OnePlus 5 has a combination of a 16 megapixel and a 20 megapixel camera on the rear. This dual camera setup allows a 1.6 times optical zoom, which you don't get on the Pixel 2 XL, but the Pixel, thanks to Google's software trickery, still manages to pull off that bokeh effect, which is what most people really want the dual camera for. And to be honest, from my current testing, the portrait mode on the Pixel 2 XL works really well. It's indistinguishable from what we've seen on other dual camera smartphones. The OnePlus, however, does have an f1.7 aperture compared to the Google's f1.8, which is a small difference, but it should mean the OnePlus, when you're not using the dual camera specific features, will get more light in the shot. Both phones can shoot 4K video at 30 frames per second, which is fine, I mean it's pretty good, but unfortunately compared to the iPhone's 4K 60, kinda pales in comparison. What is nice to see though is that with the Pixel 2, Google has introduced optical image stabilization, which works alongside the electronic image stabilization to create some super steady video. Now the OnePlus 5 actually doesn't even have optical, it uses purely electronic image stabilization, and considering that it does a pretty good job, but unfortunately it's just not going to be able to compete with optics. Now talking about the body of the two phones, the OnePlus 5 is razor thin. It's actually 7.3mm at its thickest point, and it actually gets much thinner at the edges. So because of that, it cups very nicely in the hand, and is also far thinner and far lighter than the Pixel 2 XL. Aesthetically speaking, I do like how the Pixel 2 XL has this two-tone finish. I like the black and the white, and I think the orange power button is gonna take a bit of getting used to, but it is a nice touch. Having said that, I think compared to the OnePlus 5's design, especially when looking at the rear and the OnePlus 5's matte, soft to the touch finish, I think the OnePlus 5 takes it. It's very subtle, it's clean, and the best bit, it's practical. It doesn't attract fingerprints. Having said that, from the front, the Pixel 2 XL is going to take it, because whilst it isn't the best full-screen display we've seen, it is still a full-screen display, and essentially you're comparing that to something which really does look like it belongs last year. Right, so to try and reconcile all of this, to try and bring it together into a conclusion, the OnePlus 5 is a far cheaper phone than the Pixel 2 XL, but for the most part, it's difficult to tell. In terms of performance, in terms of camera, in terms of battery life, these two phones are very much in the same ballpark. The only ways in which the Pixel 2 XL actually pulls ahead are really in terms of display resolution and also Google's specific software features, such as the ability to take portrait mode with the front camera, such as the ability to use Google Lens, which makes the camera just a little bit smarter. But apart from that, I think the phones are actually a little bit more evenly matched than they should be, given the price difference. Thanks a lot for watching guys, really hope you enjoyed the video. I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.